Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy, and this is a special series on the topic of how to talk policy and influence people. Today, I'm speaking with Yvonne Furey from the Department of Justice. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, Jane. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. So, Yvonne, to start with, can you just tell me a bit about yourself and your role within the Department of Justice, please?
Okay, so I'm a principal officer in the Department of Justice, and I currently work in the criminal justice policy function. I think we might talk a little bit more about how we're structured a little bit later, but I'm within that policy function. There are 5 policy teams, and I lead the strategic policy team. So our area is around the medium-term policy needs for the country. So the 3 to 5 years, whereas the other teams are focusing on more immediate kind of policy implementation. So I also run a small research and collaboration team. They work very closely with our Chief Information Office, but they do kind of immediate desktop research needs.
Okay.
And we also have a collaboration team, so they manage our whole cross-functional, interdepartmental, EU international coordination. So that's basically what we do at the moment. We have a number of policy priorities going on at the moment, but I think we can get into those as we go along. Yeah.
Sure. And so, Yvonne, I know within the civil service that people move around a bit, and I'm not familiar with your own kind of trajectory. Have you been kind of a lifer at the Department of Justice, so to speak, or have you
I'm afraid so.
Okay, you are, all right. And
I'm afraid so.
yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's great to maintain the interest and the expertise, because sometimes when people move, of course, that can get lost and you have to start from scratch, maybe in a new, if you're moved to health or housing.
True. And it's an odd thing about the civil service, I think, that people find that you can completely change jobs. In this old idea of being a generalist, that you just moved and you picked up and you learned. One thing I will say about the Department of Justice, it's a huge department. The work is massively varied. I've been there since 1998. I have worked in the asylum area. I have worked in the EU international area, policy area. I have serviced EU working groups over and back to Brussels a lot. I spent, my longest stint was 12 years in the criminal legislation side.
Okay.
And there I did legislation relating to, well, my last piece of legislation, which was one of my biggest pieces, was Sexual Offences Act in 2017. Okay. But I've also done legislation relating to organised crime, prisons, community service, international cooperation, and even a small piece around Commission of Investigations. So I think the work is so diverse. I mean, if you look at the department overall, I mean, you've got on the civil side, massive, policy issues around persons with disability and with capacity issues. You've got issues around family and family law, the courts, obviously, and then the whole equality and integration function, policy areas. So, I mean, it's a huge, diverse department. So I do feel you get a lot of experience, a lot of varied experience working there, yeah.
For sure, and very important stuff. I mean, this cuts to the center of life for many people, or issues that are deeply personal, or you mentioned sexual offenses there that can have so much harm for the victim. And of course, to get definitions right, you need to think things through and be careful and analyze the gaps and how it has impact in investigation and the courts and that type of thing. Yvonne, did you always want to be a civil servant?
No, I don't think so. It's a really good question, because my family, sometimes these are kind of traditions and families, you know about it, you're familiar with it. Nobody in my family was ever a civil servant. I think one of my mother's cousins, maybe. Now, there was public service. My grandfather was a guard. My mom and her mom were nurses, and God bless our frontline workers at the moment.
Indeed.
They're really, really relying on them right now. But for me, I studied law. I got my LLB from UCG in UIG now in 1998. And I had a big interest in the human rights side, and particularly in international monitoring protocols. So I was really lucky, and I got an internship to the UN High Commission on Human Rights a couple of months after I graduated. Yeah, it was really fantastic. And it was 1998. Mary Robinson had just taken on the role of High Commissioner. It was also the 50th anniversary of most of the bodies and institutions. So, nearly every world leader turned up in Geneva at some point during that time. But I think what struck me most about the work, and it was wonderful work and amazing dedicated people working over there, really the difference is at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the difference can be made. And it kind of just gave me an interest in coming home and seeing where I could fit in at the national level. So I came back, and a couple of months later, an opportunity came up. It's just as a clerical officer, right down at the bottom in the Department of Justice. And I took it, and I've been there since 1998. Yeah. So I think the public service motivation was definitely behind trying to get back into that. But that was driven by my experience in Geneva, I think.
That is so interesting. We might come back to some of the international monitoring bodies later on, or something around OPCAT, the Optional Protocol to the Prevention of Torture, because I know that was something that within the department you've been thinking about for a while and looking at have you got the ducks in a row. But so the policy making process, I guess, was something that interested you. I'm imagining from that time in Geneva when you were thinking, what will I do next? How can I have an impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, the policy making piece it impacts every single one of us. It's our daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I probably wasn't interested in any kind of sophisticated way, looking at the policy life cycle or anything like that. I mean, it was probably a bit more naive. But, as I've gotten into the role more, and even on the legislation side, prior to the restructuring of the department, you did a lot of that policy making. I mean, it's much more formalized now, I think. It's much more stable. There's a lot more space for it now. But, it's that kind of idea of looking at the rationale, the objectives, trying to monitor what's happening, evaluate it, and do the review. So yeah, I mean, the whole cycle is fascinating and interesting. But what drives our policy is often, it comes from very different things. It could be a single thing, it could be a court judgment comes out in the morning. I mean, often we will have sight of that. We know, it's a possibility because obviously it's going through the whole process. So, hopefully we'll have our ducks in a row, as you say, to address what we think the outcomes of those might be. I mean, implementing EU measures is another way. Clearly, crises are a massive policy driver, and I don't think we could have ever imagined one like we're going through at the moment. And the policy changes, how it's been adapted, revised, amended in the matter of days, even hours, over the last 4 weeks has been quite extraordinary, and that is across government. That's not just ourselves, but even within our own house. I mean, we have had to redeploy many staff into our direct provision area.
Right.
We need to get, to ensure that the centres are best supported in managing safe social distancing, to make sure we have appropriate isolation suites if they're needed. So, I mean, a lot of that, I see the press release has gone out this morning about the work that's been going on in that area. Another area, I mean, we're all told to stay at home, but, sometimes the risk is at home, and domestic violence has been hugely on our agenda now. So An Garda Síochána have been great. They're proactively engaging people who have previously made complaints, who have been victims of domestic violence, calling in with them, checking up on how they're doing.
That's great.
We also have made sure that the courts are in a position to be able to hear in every district any applications for barring or protection orders. We ourselves are engaging proactively with the support groups that work with victims out there, so that we make sure that they have the support of whatever they need in place. And also just about communications and a campaign and information awareness raising. So there's a lot of that work going on. But outside of crises, I think the work we normally do is very much led by Programme for Government commitments. There's a lot of work there. From our own reviewing of existing policy, where is it working, where is it not, what needs to be done. Also from our own strategic goals and priorities, which we set, and which we're about to start a new process. When a new minister comes in, we'll be starting a new process of developing a new strategy statement and consultation. So, yeah.
So then those are the ways that policy gets made. Do the likes of NGOs help shape policy? I suppose they do, in terms of maybe making pre-election overtures to politicians and
absolutely,
writing manifestos and trying to get their issue, whatever it might be, in relation to domestic violence or child protection or prison, into a manifesto. Is that fair to say, Yvonne?
That is one way of doing it, but also, I mean, we, over the last number of years, I think it's been quite a sea change in the level of consultation that we do. Particularly over on the civil side, they've had a lot of strategies that they developed. You know, you've got the gender strategy, you've got disability strategies, minority strategies. So you've got all of these strategies. All of those were done in deep consultation with, you know, stakeholders and NGO sector and academia. So I think that's a hugely important part of it, because if we don't engage with the people with the real life experiences, we can't develop the policy that addresses the needs. And a lot of those strategies are basically about, you know, setting out a way to reach certain goals over, you know, a 3 or a 5 year period. Something we're increasingly going to we're going to do on the criminal justice side as well. You know, so I do think engagement with NGOs and with stakeholders and partners is key, absolutely key, yeah.
And you mentioned the programme for government. So we had an election just recently. Obviously, that was a massive shift. We couldn't have actually predicted the outcome of that, with the huge surge in Sinn Féin and the two dominant parties taking a severe hit. But we're nowhere further now to having a government. We have the caretaker government, who are actually doing very well, I think, on COVID-19 responses.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
You know, they're really doing their best in immensely challenging times. But obviously, we're all operating in an emergency situation, and normal policy is probably not really being made now. It's crisis management. But the Department of Justice, prior to all of this, has been undergoing a period of structural change. Can you tell me a bit about that, Yvonne? What prompted the changes within the department?
I suppose, I mean, we all know there's been a number of reviews into the department, into its structures, the way it works, the way it engages over the last number of years, 5, 6, 7 years. Some of those have been led by the department, where we have brought in people to take a look at us. Some have been, you know, the government have requested that these be done. But the most recent one was done by a group called the Effectiveness and Renewal Group, whose final report in, I think it was late 2018, recommended that a complete restructuring of the department be done. So we were very much a subject-based department. We worked around, somebody worked on crime, somebody worked in equality, somebody worked in integration. And the Effectiveness and Renewal Group, and it took me a little bit of time, actually, at the time, to understand what they were trying to do. They really wanted us to focus on what we do, not the subject, but what we do. So that's governance of our agencies, or, you know, policy making or legislation. And really what they brought home to us is we're one of the few departments that have been around since the foundation of the state, and we were still structured more or less the same way,
right,
as we were 100 years ago. And it just wasn't set up to do the work that we now do. So moving away from the subject-based, they moved us into the functional base. So we now have 2 pillars, as we call them in the department. We have the criminal justice side and the civil justice side. And there's a corporate section in the middle that supports both. And what we have done is we've taken what we do, so governance of agencies. So there's a governance section in both pillars, criminal and civil, policy in both, legislation in both, and service delivery in both. So service delivery, obviously our big service delivery is on the immigration side, be it visas, citizenship, anything like that, and obviously direct provision and international protection. So that's basically what prompted this massive structural change. I think for me, it's been great. It definitely has given a lot of space to being able to develop policy more, to engage more. It's taken a lot of day-to-day work away from me, like answering questions, you know, which is great work. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's distracting.
Yes,
on a day-to-day basis when you're trying to, you know, really get your head into a policy space. So it really has worked well. And rather than teams, previously we would have one team just looking at prisons, maybe somebody else focusing on policing, somebody else on the courts. This is much more end-to-end kind of structure with a policy function looking at the whole of the criminal justice area. end to end. And that is led by one assistant secretary. So he has a full overview of the whole policy making function across the whole. So it's not been led by 2 or 3. So it is really working. It's been frustrating. It's been challenging. It was done in 9 months.
Change is hard.
Change is hard. And to reorganize a department the size of the Department of Justice was, you know, a big piece of work. But I really do think, you know, as those teething problems hopefully, you know, dissipate over the coming months, you know, it really will be a far more efficient and effective department. So yeah, it's been good.
One of the things a few years ago from, I think it was a Toland report, said that the Department of Justice was kind of closed and secretive and silo driven. Personally, I would think it's become a lot more open, you know, that it's more accessible and that you are out there more and proactively saying we want to hear from you guys, you know, you have a voice, use it and help us. You know, develop the best policies that we can possibly deliver. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it. I would agree we weren't good at it, particularly. I would agree there's been a massive change. I think the willingness, it's been driven from the top, but I think it's throughout the organisation. I mean, we have to do it within the organisation as well, talk better with each other, communicate better with everyone. So, I mean, it was all about that open communication piece, but to be honest, the partnerships, and were always partnerships externally, but they're just much more open now, I think. They're much broader, you know, there's a broader range of people involved in them, and I think the benefits have been amazing. I think some of the work on some of the strategies that the department has produced in the last few years is a testament to that partnership and collaboration and the willingness of people to come and talk to us as well. That's not always an easy thing to do.
No, that's true. So you mentioned some of the policy priorities prior to the emergency situation in which we find ourselves. Are there specific priorities that you were working on before the crisis, Yvonne?
So with the restructuring, we called ourselves, we stood up in September under our new structure. So my work has been fairly limited, kind of going back to then. I also carried over a couple of projects that needed to be finished. But the big piece of work we have progressed in September, and you know, I'm quite proud of it, is a piece of work around community safety and developing a new policy of community safety. It does come from the Commission on the Future Policing report and the implementation plan that has followed from that about a policing service for the future. But what the Commission found was, and they used comparative kind of research from other countries, but they feel it very much applies equally here, that around 80% of police time is spent on non-police work. It's about harm prevention. It's dealing with vulnerable members of our societies, those with mental health issues, those with substance abuse issues, homelessness, vulnerable children, you know what I mean? So what the idea is to bring all the services that should be interacting with them into the picture and make it a much more collaborative approach to addressing the community safety needs. It's not just about being safe in the community, it's about people feeling safe in their communities. And one of the things we really want to do with that then is to bring it to a local level. We will develop a national structure, but the intention is to bring it to a local level so that communities can really proactively feed into what their needs are. And then we can somehow identify what services are needed in that area. And that is going to be different if it's, you know, a small town in the west of Ireland, or if it's the northeast inner city. And in fact, the north inner city here in Dublin, the northeast inner city specifically, has been a great example of a collaborative approach over the last number of years, following on from the Mulvey report, to really address, you know, local and community issues specific to a smaller area. So at the moment, the policy paper has been developed. The intention is to allow that will feed into a new piece of legislation for community policing and community safety bill. So work is progressing on that, and ultimately I hope that will all go out for consultation. But we have held a series of consultations with some, you know, other government departments, because we do see such a role, a whole of government approach to community safety going forward into the future. So that's probably the biggest piece of work. But I've also been working on a new criminal justice strategy, which is a whole sectoral initiative. So that is another key piece of work that's been kind of running in parallel, and unfortunately has been a little bit
waylaid.
Struck by, yeah, by the current crisis.
How could it not be?
Small thing. We will get back to it.
Of course you will, Yvonne. Just on that whole of government piece, because it was one of my questions, and it's great that you've already started having some conversations in the community safety context, because of course the health or mental health or housing issues that people might have, or homelessness issues, they have, they're wider issues than just justice. But of course,
absolutely,
they can have justice ramifications. You know, if I'm a drug addicted, mentally ill, homeless person shouting and roaring on the street, and then putting someone in fear, an old lady in fear, I might be hauled before the courts for public order. So it has knock-on effects. But the need for a wider systemic whole of government, whole of society approach, particularly to community safety, is quite timely and exciting. So has that been a nice piece of work to be involved with?
Yeah, it is. It's a great piece of work. I mean, it's challenging.
Yeah.
And I would say, and often, you know, it's one of those things, it's so enormous that sometimes you have to break it down,
of course,
into the smaller parts so that you can even just comprehend it. But what we did, and Taoiseachs really supported us on this. I mean, from their role in terms of overseeing the implementation of the Policing Service for the Future plan. But they've been really supportive, you know, and helped facilitate a number of consultations with other government departments, because community safety won't work without that collaborative approach across government. And the intention now is to progress that further. You know, we're engaging a bit with Dublin City Council because of their experience in the Northeast inner city, trying to learn from that piece of work that's been done. There's been similar work done in Limerick through the Regeneration Project back in the day. So there's pockets of it, but we just need to bring it together in a more kind of systemic and consistent way, I think. But it has been a really interesting project. It's a real long-term project. This isn't a project that we're going to have bedded down in every community in the next 3 or 5 years. You know, it's a project, and it'll need to be community driven as well, but we need to be there to support it. And that's why I think, you know, we're looking at some kind of national structure that might help provide training or other needs that are needed, and to bring the services together. So yeah, no, it's been a good project.
It's very exciting for sure. And Yvonne, do you think in general we have done enough interdepartmental whole of government policy making? This is not just a justice issue now, but across kind of seeing public health and justice as having a kind of synergy, you know, because say in relation to stuff that I'm interested in, trauma and adverse childhood experiences, and then structural disadvantage, how that not only leads to health problems and mental health problems and increased risk of suicide and addiction, but increased risk of being violent and being a victim of violence, so that we need to kind of abandon the silo approach where it's I'll just look at housing now and not have conversations with my colleagues in other departments.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Jane. I mean, for many people who enter the criminal justice system, it's because something failed before that. We tend to be at the end of the line. And I'm not talking about the people that the guards are helping in the prevention of harm area. I'm talking about people who are now in the criminal justice system. For some, that happens at the age of 12. For some, that happens 15, 17, or maybe into their 20s. But there was an opportunity, many probably, along the way to intervene before that. I think we are doing a lot more in this area, particularly with children. The youth justice strategy, which is currently being developed, has been developed across departments. There's been a group working together with academia and with you know, other departments, agencies, also with people who work with children on the ground and with troubled youths and vulnerable youths. The Greentown project that's being done out of UL is a great example of, you know, collaboration between ourselves and DCYA, Children and Youth Affairs, apologise, and in consultation with Dongardi Síochána, looking at the influence of criminal networks on young people. So there is has been. I think it's utterly critical. I mean, I talk a lot about individual and collective responsibility to deliver on our agendas, but I think we need to also focus a lot on the shared benefit from doing this. It's not just about, sometimes when we talk about shared responsibility, it sounds a little bit like we're trying to get you to do something.
Yeah.
But it's the shared benefit that we really, I think, needs to be focused on. And this isn't just a justice issue. I mean, I think other departments, you know, I work closely with other departments. I've been working closely with them on the community safety, and, you know, certainly rural community development, the housing, local government, they understand that need to work, you know, for the benefit of all communities, you know what I mean? So I do think it is something that is, you know, certainly much more in everyone's mind's eye, or something that, you know what I mean, that is people are much more aware of it and the need for it. Yeah.
I was talking to a colleague of yours before from the department, and he was saying that many of your clients, you know, your troubled teens who are causing a lot of mayhem and harm and fear in communities, they're the same clients that are dropping out of school or having very reduced hours. And so again, the overlap between education, or what can education do? How can education I suppose in some ways be reoriented towards safety and emotional regulation and other non-cognitive learning skills, but those that help us to be regulated, well-functioning, pro-social people. And but that it's slow. It's becoming more aware, but that there can be difficulties there. Yvonne, I attended one of your events shortly before the major outbreak and lockdown here up in Dublin at Blackhall Place, where you had a gathering of academics and lawyers, and it was very interesting discussing where to, you know, where can we go with this criminal justice strategy into the future. That, I imagine, is a pretty long-term piece of work as well. It's not going to...
Well, it's progressed quite well despite current conditions. What we had was, so basically, I suppose, just to give anyone listening a background to this, in 2014, I think we set up a Criminal Justice Strategic Committee. So it's chaired by the department by our Deputy Secretary, Una McPhillips. And it's all the heads of the agencies within the criminal justice sector. So you've the Garda Commissioner there, you've the DPP, the prison, you know, Director General of the prisons, Director of Probations, basically all the directors, CEOs across the criminal justice area. And they meet quarterly, and the intention had always been that they could meet and discuss common issues. And over the few years, we've done lots of things with them. They've developed a leadership program for across the sector, but they've also, last year, we introduced a joint action plan for the management of offenders. But this year, one of the things they want to do is just examine the interaction across the criminal justice sector as a whole. You know, we do things in one part of the sector. A good example that it's an easy example we always use is increasing Garda numbers, which is a great thing. Increased detections, that's great. There are impacts for the courts, for the prison, for the probation service, for the forensic service, for the legal aid board. So everyone is impacted on it, but we only wanted to increase the number of guards. So these are the kind of things is that we would map those, figure out pinch points, and basically help assist with capacity. So the Strategic Committee late last year decided that a sectoral strategy would be of value. And a subgroup of that committee then kind of looked at it, and we came up with kind of themes around efficiencies, building capacity, looking at individual interactions with the sector, looking at the community interaction with the sector. And then obviously the one that always comes up in everything, data, and data is the driver for change. So we held then during February into March, I think we got the last one in, actually the one you attended there early in March, four consultations. So the first one was with the sector as a whole. We then met with the other government departments, so bring that piece in again. And then we had one with the NGOs before finally the academic and professionals piece in Blackhall Place, as you say. So we are now in the process of, slightly delayed, but of finalising a report following the consultation paper. It's interesting what came out, although we had, put people into various different consultations within their own kind of groups. It's the same things that have come out across.
That's cool.
A lot of, yeah, it is. It's very interesting. Issues around, definitely the data and the evidence has come out quite strongly, but issues around training, issues around understanding the system, like public understanding of the system and how that would enhance public confidence of the system. So all of those kind of issues we're beginning to look at. Also about making sure, the complexity of the criminal justice system is really based on the fact that it's trying to meet the needs of victims, offenders, families, witnesses, practitioners, advocates. It is and they're generally in conflict.
Yeah.
They don't have a shared, often they don't have a shared outcome, and it is really difficult to balance that, but that is our responsibility and our need. And I think people there will always be somebody unhappy with an outcome, but if we can increase the understanding of it, it may go some way to helping to reduce trauma, I think, and that which the criminal justice system can be. It's complex, it's difficult, it's adversarial.
Exacerbated, I think, for sure. For victims, say, of sexual violence, the process, the reporting process, and the cross-examination and the media report, it can all make the wounds more painful and prevent other people from coming forward, I suppose. But also there is something about being heard as well, so that,
very important.
Yeah, that if sometimes victims just want to have their victimhood acknowledged and their wounds heard, and sometimes as well, I think the current system doesn't always allow the voice of the offender to be heard to its maximum benefit. We mentioned certain things about them being poor and drug addicted maybe, and out of school for a long time, but you don't get the full whammy of the backstory either to understand what that can do to a person. But in terms of the consultation, and I was quite impressed by your plans for it, and a willingness to talk to people from a wide range of backgrounds, including those with, say, lived experience of addiction and offending. But how important is it to you now and to your colleagues in the department to speak to as wide a range of stakeholders as possible?
Well, that is one of, unfortunately, minor victim of the current crisis. Is the second half of April and May was for us to get out into the communities, actually to get out of Dublin and go and talk to people and to talk to groups and individuals using local fora like public partnership networks or the JPCs. And that has been put on hold, obviously, at this point in time. But there are other ways that we are looking at an online consultation piece that we're going to try and do. So I'm working with, one of the other benefits from our restructuring is we've created a much more sophisticated, what we call transparency unit, but we have a much more robust kind of events management team in there and social media team. So they provide an awful lot of support to the rest of us in organising these events, which under the old system we were also trying to do. As long as well as writing the policy, you were booking the sandwiches. So they working with them, and and there's professionals in there. So working with them, I'm looking at trying to see if we can organise an online consultation over the next few weeks. The time frame for this had been to complete this by maybe end of Q3 of this year, but we may have to revisit that, but I'd like to see as little slippage as possible, because I think it's quite an important piece, and there's been good work done to date that I wouldn't like to see it become out of date or lose, become a bit stale.
And just lose the energy behind it, I suppose.
Precisely.
But of course, we're just in such uncertain times that depending how long the pandemic lasts, it'll remain the biggest and only issue in really capturing imagination. And it's about survival essentially. So
It is. And that's one of our struggles, is trying to get back to the day job. And, you know, I mean, it's amazing. We are all learning technology now, you know, even this, you know, it's fantastic. But, you know, we do need to get back to doing these policies. This time will pass.
Yes.
And we need to be ready to get back to work and be, you know, progress things as much as possible and bring back our normality, hopefully, with as little harm as possible.
It probably also just keeps people feeling a bit safe too, to keep plodding on with the work, you know, and not feverishly searching for the latest update on the virus, because that only feeds further fears and uncertainty. So to get stuck into something is no bad thing either, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So in general, this is kind of my last question, I think, Yvonne, because you've been very generous with your time. How can ordinary people in normal times engage with the policy making process? So when, let's say, there is no public consultation on a specific issue, can they still write to the department? Or are there ways of saying this is an issue, or having a group of community activists write? Like, are you accessible in that way to people?
Absolutely. We receive a lot of correspondence. But no, absolutely. I mean, the email address is on our website. There's phone numbers you can always call and ask to speak to. I mean, in one way, with a structure, you know, I want to speak to somebody in criminal policy, you know, I mean, it's easy enough fine now because we're right there. But I still think we really need to do the consultation piece. I think we are responsible to make ourselves accessible. We need to, you know, use social media. We need to make it known that we're doing these consultations. We need to get outside of Dublin more. We need to talk to, we need to talk to, you know, community groups. I mean, we've got great partnerships with, you know, and long-standing partnerships with some well-known organizations. We need to just get out there a little bit more. And I think, you know, that's what I'm hoping I will be able to do over the next while, and that we can build up a process of doing that. So yeah, I mean, obviously anyone can write to us at any time, but I really would like to see us getting out face to face. I find the face to face piece so helpful, not just for me, but for everybody else that's in the room, because they hear what that person is saying too.
Yes.
And I think it sometimes it helps people understand what we produce in the end, that there wasn't agreement, or there were conflicting views. And, you know, criminal justice is about balancing rights, and it is a precious little exercise that you need to be so mindful of and wary of in another way, that, you know, you don't overbalance in one direction, you know, against another. So I find it really useful when I have a group of people in a room who can hear each other speak and hear all of the opinions and all of the views in a room. So, and that's really helpful to me. And also it's helpful if I can be challenged in a space. Yeah. You know, you can send me in correspondence and letter, and that's always very useful and very, very welcome. But, you know, that gives me time to think about my response.
Yeah. That's true. Whereas if you're slightly ambushed, you mean,
Yeah, it has happened.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I've heard that from other people. Say, I was talking to a man the other day who's a chief superintendent involved with the community safety project that I'm doing an evaluation for. But he was saying it's very important to be held to account, you know,
Absolutely.
to actually be questioned. And then if there's a misapprehension or someone doesn't actually get why something happened or did not happen, you at least offer an explanation.
Yeah,
they are heard. They may not like the explanation, but it's better than speaking into a vacuum, you know. And you know, again, just the therapeutic nature of being heard, and then very satisfying, of course, if you can get some action, you know, if what you say can plant a seed in someone's head, and then you go back and try and measure everything out and see what can be done where. And you're absolutely right, you can't please everyone. You can that's not
no it's not possible. And you know, the beauty of kind of talking to people is they're talking to you from their experience, which is fantastic, and we need to take that into account. But there are many experiences, and And it's just, we have to manage the relationship with all of those and make sure that, as you said, they feel like they've been heard, they understand where we're coming from, and yeah, they hold us to account. We should be held to account.
Okay, Yvonne, I will let you go there. I was going to ask you about the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. I imagine that's not going to be ratified anytime soon under the current pandemic situation, but it's something that's been on the table for a fair long while. And from your experience, that time in Geneva before you became a civil servant, do you think there is value in having these international human rights mechanisms and monitoring bodies? And if so, what is the value of them for public policy?
I think it's, I mean, we value them as a department. I mean, the I can't remember the one that was done last year.
CERD, was it CERD?
Yes, elimination racial discrimination, yes. You know, that it's a really positive process. One, it's such a huge process, you know, in terms of, you know, the amount of people involved in preparing for one of those. So it's a really good opportunity. We take them extremely seriously. And it's a really good opportunity for, you know, to get everyone together, really thinking about where are we with these, you know, thinking about what are the questions we're going to get asked, engaging with the NGO sector, who are terrific in holding us to account and through this process. You know, they're all there, they're engaging with the committee members, they're talking, you know what I mean? So it is a really, really good process. And I think we always come out stronger at the end of it. When the recommendations come through, I mean, we don't always agree with everything, but, you know, and there may be misunderstandings and clarifications required after the process. But I mean, I still love watching them, even if you're not involved. I still find it a really fascinating process. And, you know, I think it's fantastic because we do, as a department and as a country, take them extremely seriously. And we take the recommendations very seriously afterwards. So yeah, I definitely think they have a value, a massive value. And, you know, I also think they're quite good fun, to be honest.
Yeah, no, they are. I was involved with the UN Convention Against Torture hearings, and they are fascinating to see. And again, relationships, this is one thing actually. I think relationships at every level are important in the policy making process, in the sense that I had no clue about really how these things went when I was in Geneva in 2011. I had very little experience with human rights. And I just thought, you know what, I'll go and talk to them. I'll ask a question. I'll ask them to find out about the Thornton Hall timeline for that planned super prison. And I didn't really know if that was acceptable or not, to go up and tap them on the shoulder and say, listen, Felice or Cleopas, could you ask this question? And they did, and they were thrilled. And, you know, it got an answer from the state. And eventually then Alan Shatter was the Minister for Justice and had the Thornton Hall review. And they said, you know what, we don't have the money for this. We can't build this. And we can't let the situation lie either. We need to do something about Mountjoy, and we need to do something about court to eliminate overcrowding and slopping out. So it's really interesting to see how taking advantage of the opportunity to build a little relationship can, you know, can lead to, or can contribute at least, because no one can claim credit for anything in this entirely. You know, it's a partnership approach at best, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, but to use the voice that you have when you're presented with an opportunity, and not be kind of kicking yourself afterwards for not having said it. Would you agree that sometimes people can be too afraid, or I don't want to put my hand up and say, sorry, Yvonne, what about this? And then they miss the opportunity. But there's always email.
There's always email.
Okay, Yvonne Furey from the Department of Justice, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you for your hard work in the Department of Justice. To you and all your colleagues, I know it's not easy. We can hurl muck occasionally and say things aren't happening quickly enough, but it's a difficult job. and it's good to know motivated people like yourself are in there. So thank you for telling us how to talk policy and influence people, and stay safe and well, Yvonne.
You too, Jane. Thank you very much.